Welcome to Restoria. I'm Arthur, and this is your quiet place for gentle bedtime stories. Get comfortable, take a breath, and let the story slow your thoughts and ease you softly into sleep. Rain after the drought. For 9 weeks the valley had gone without water from the sky. Thomas had watched the fields change through every one of them. Thomas first the full green of early summer, then a paler green, then the color of straw, and at last a color he had no name for, somewhere between old paper and the underside of a dry leaf. The grass did not bend in the evening breeze as it once had. It rattled. It whole hillside of it, accounting itself, rattling like something counting itself. The Notos collapsed. He came out onto the porch at the end of the day, as he had come out onto it most days of his life. The boards took his weight and gave their familiar complaint under his boots. 90 feet of valley fell away in front of him, down to the line of the creek that no longer ran, and up again to the ridge where the last of the sun was letting go of the stones. The heat of the afternoon lay over everything, yet like a hand that had not yet lifted. He could smell the dust of it. That was the smell of these weeks, the smell he had grown so used to that he had stopped naming it. Dust and dry seed, and stone that had baked all day and gave its heat back now into the cooling hour. The well had gone shy. Not dry, not yet, but shy. The bucket coming up with less than it used to, and the water in it holding a faint taste of the deep earth it had been drawn from. He had been careful with it. The garden by the kitchen door he watered by hand, a cup at a time, to the roots and nowhere else. The 2 apple trees he had let fend for themselves, and they had dropped their hard little fruit early and stood now with their leaves curled inward, holding what little they had. Everything on the land had learned the same lesson in these weeks. Hold what you have. Hold what you have. Ask for nothing. Wait. Wait. These weeks had worn a shape into his days, and the shape was water. He rose before the heat each morning and walked the fields while the ground held the cool of the early hour. He checked the well first, every day, lowering the bucket and listening for the sound it made going down, reading the depth by the length of rope that ran out through his hands before the splash. Then the garden, then the animals, then whatever the day asked after that, done early, because by midday the sun stood over the valley and pressed the work out of a man and sent him into the shade to wait it out. These weeks had worn a shape into his days, and the shape was water. He had walked the the low field that very morning, the one that fell away below the porch. The grass came to his knees there once. Now it stood brown and thin and rattled at his passing, and the earth beneath it had opened in a map of cracks a man could lay 2 fingers into. A hare had watched him from the fence line, gone lean with the dry season, and had not troubled to run. There was nothing left in that field for either of them. There was he stood a while among the rattling grass and looked at the sky and found it the same hard blue it had been for 9 weeks, and he had walked back up to the house with the dust of his own fields on his boots. Now it stood brown and thin and rattled at his passing. At midday he had carried water to the garden, as he had carried it every noon of the drought. Cup by cup from the shy well, out to the beds by the kitchen door, poured to the roots under the old sheet he rigged on canes to break the worst of the sun. The horse had stood in the black shade inside the barn door, tail going at the flies, content to do nothing until the cool came. The hens had dug themselves hollows in the dry dust of the yard and sat in them with their feathers loose, blinking, waiting the heat out in their own fashion. The whole holding had learned to move little through the middle of the day and save itself for the evening. The whole holding had learned to move little through the middle of the day and save itself for the evening. And every evening of those 9 weeks he had come out to this porch and looked to the west. And every evening the west had shown him nothing he could use. High thin cloud that burned off to nothing, a haze that promised and lied, a haze that promised and lied, a sky going down clean and cloudless into another dry dawn. He had learned not to hope at it too hard. A man who farms learns that the weather owes him nothing and keeps its own counsel, and that the wanting of rain has never once brought it a day sooner. So he had watched and waited and gone in each night to sleep and risen to walk the dry fields again. High thin cloud that burned off to nothing, a haze that promised and lied, a cloudless going down clean and into another dry dawn. But this evening the air was doing something it had not done in a good while. Thomas felt it before he understood it. Thomas felt it before he understood it. A change in the weight of things. The heat was there yet, pressing up from the ground, but above it now there moved a thin current of something cooler, coming down off the ridge from the west, and it carried a scent he had almost forgotten. He stood with one hand on the rail and turned his face into it. The scent was faint. It was the smell of water that had not yet arrived. It was the smell of water that had not yet arrived. The smell of rain an hour out, maybe more, traveling ahead of itself on the moving air. The smell of rain. Out to the west, the the sky had begun to build. All through the drought, the clouds had been thin and high and useless, the kind that passed over without meaning anything. These were different. They had a base to them, a flat grey underside sitting level above the far hills, and above that a steady piling of shapes that caught the last of the sun along their tops and burned there a dull gold. They were not hurrying. They were the came as weather comes when it is sure of itself, in its own time, gathering as it came. Thomas watched the gold go off the high edges of them as the sun sank, and the grey deepen, and he did not move from the rail. All through the drought, the clouds had been thin and high and useless, the kind that passed over without meaning anything. These were different. They were a kind of hot stoma creeping over Kevin. The dog came out to find him. She was old now, stiffer than she had been, and she came along the boards with the loose, easy roll of a creature that had nothing left to prove. She pressed her side against his leg for a moment, as she always did, and then she lay down at the top of the steps with a heavy exhale and put her chin on her paws. She had felt it too. Animals felt the change in the air before people did. All afternoon she had been restless, pacing the yard, lying down and getting up again. Now she had settled. Whatever was coming, she meant to meet it here, beside him, on the boards. Longjoining becomes overly unbelievable. York Mary sent an order toward an enclosed motion with grizzlies in the taboos. He lowered himself into the chair by the rail. It was an old wooden chair gone grey with weather, and it had learned the shape of him over the years of his sitting. His legs were glad to stop. There was a tiredness in them that came up from the feet and settled behind the knees. The good tiredness of a body that had done its work and could now be let down. He let it down. He sat, and the chair took him, and the boards took the chair, and the ground took the porch, and somewhere far below all of it, the old rock took the ground. Everything holding everything else. Everything smoothly. The valley went on emptying of light. Down at the creek, the willows stood grey and unmoving, their roots reaching after a water that had left them weeks ago. The fields between here and there lay in stripes of shadow now, the shape of the ridge printed across them by the low sun. A single bird went over, high up, making for somewhere. Then the sky had it, and it was gone, and there was only the building weather in the west and the smell of the coming water and the rattle of the dry grass on the hill, which even now was beginning to quiet as the breeze turned and steadied and came on cool from the direction of the cloud. The sky hid it and it was gone, and there was only the building weather in the west and the smell of the coming water and the rattle of the dry grass on the hill, which even now was beginning to quiet as the breeze. When the last of the usable light had gone, he got up to see to the lamp. It stood on the table by the door, an old oil lamp with a brass base worn to a dull shine by years of being carried and set down and carried again. He lifted the glass, trimmed the wick down with his thumbnail out of old habit, and struck a match against the underside of the table where the wood had been rubbed smooth for exactly that. The match caught. He touched it to the wick and watched the flame take hold and steady, and he lowered the glass back over it, and the porch filled with a circle of yellow that pushed the evening back a little way from the door. Lifted. The third step down from the porch had given way one winter, years ago now. A board rotted through at the join, and he had meant to fix it that spring and every spring after, and had never once done it. Instead, his feet had learned it. Instead, he took the second step and then the fourth, a short stretch of the leg that his body made without asking him, in hitch in his stride that only he knew was there. A hitch in his stride that only he knew was there. A hitch that he could fiddy the movement before he could steady that his feet always did, over the broken step and into the yard, over the broken step and into the yard. The Urus scandling adores of the queeps, a moth partaker. He filled her water bowl from the day's careful jug and set it by the bottom step where she liked it. She did not get up. She only thumped her tail once against the boards to say she had seen, and put her chin back down. The jug had a little left in the bottom, and he tipped it into the roots of the rosemary by the door, rather than carry it back inside. The rosemary had held on through all of it. Tough old thing, grey-green and woody, wanting nothing, asking nothing, giving off its clean, resinous smell when he brushed against it as he passed. He brushed against it now on purpose, just to have the smell. Just to have the smell. The garden by the kitchen door was a modest thing. 4 beds no bigger than tabletops, and it was the only green left on the whole holding. He had kept it alive a cupful at a time through the worst of the weeks. Beans climbing their strings, a row of onions with their tops gone over, some late lettuce he shaded with an old sheet through the burning middle of each day. It was not much to have saved, but it had given him a reason to walk out each evening with a cup in his hand and pour it out to the earth and watch the earth take it, and that had been worth more to him through these weeks than the beans would ever be. The garden by the kitchen door was a modest thing, but it was the holding with nothing involved, just their facets. The scent on the air had thickened while he worked. It was no longer a hint travelling ahead of the weather. It was the thing itself now, close, a green mineral smell rising to meet the dust that had ruled the valley so many weeks. Off to the west there came a low sound, so low he felt it in the boards more than heard it in his ears. A low roll that started somewhere behind the far hills and travelled the length of the sky and faded out over the ridge above him. The dog's ears moved. Then the sound was gone and the smell stayed, and the cool current came on steadier from the deepening shape of the cloud. The dog's ears moved. He climbed back up over the broken step and settled again into the chair. The lamp threw his shadow far across the boards and up the wall of the house behind him. Far down the valley, on the opposite hillside, a single point of yellow showed where the next farm stood. The neighbor would be out on his own porch, most likely, watching the same weather come, wanting it the same way. The whole valley had been wanting it together for 9 weeks. There was a kind of company in that, Thomas thought, even across 2 miles of failing fields. Every soul under this sky tonight was turned the same direction, waiting for the same thing. The whole valley had been wanting it together for 9 weeks. Every soul under this sky tonight was turned the same direction, waiting for the same thing. He was in no hurry for it. That was the strange gift of the waiting. For weeks he had wanted the rain so badly that the wanting had become a kind of ache he carried around the fields with him. Now that it was surely coming, now that he could smell it and feel it and hear its first far voice behind the hills, the ache had gone out of the wanting and left only the pleasure of knowing. It would come when it came. He had nothing to do to hurry it and nothing to do to stop it. For once in all this dry season there was nothing required of him at all, only to sit and to be here when it arrived. Only to sit and to be here when it arrived. The dark came up out of the valley as it always did, rising from the low ground first, pooling in the creek bed and the folds of the fields, and then climbing the slopes toward the last grey light caught along the ridge. The lamp beside him grew brighter as the world around it dimmed, though the flame had not changed at all. A moth found it and began its patient circling. The boards under his boots gave back the day's heat into the soles of his feet. He folded his hands in his lap. The cool current moved over the porch and stirred the hair at his temple and moved on into the house through the open door behind him. The moth found it and began its patient circling. The boards under his boots gave back the day's heat into the soles of his feet. He folded his hands in his lap. The cool current moved over the porch. Then, far out over the western fields, he saw the first of it come. Not felt, seen. seem. A grey veil let down from the flat base of the cloud, hanging between the sky and the land, moving across the far slopes with the patience of something that had all the time in the world. Where it passed, the hills went soft and lost their edges. It was a good way off yet. It was coming up the valley toward him at the speed of a person walking, no faster, and he sat and watched it come and felt his whole body go quiet with the watching. No faster. Perfect. The grey veil crossed the creek and came on up the near slope, and Thomas watched the line of it move across his own low field, the field he had walked that very morning through grass that rattled. For a moment the field was dry. Then it was not. He saw the first drops strike the dust of the yard below him, each one raising a tiny puff where it landed, a dry flag thrown up and gone. 1. Then 3. Then a scattering he could not count, darkening the pale dust in a spreading rash of spots, each spot a place where water had touched ground that had forgotten the feel of it. The grey veil reached the creek and dug the field. He saw the first drops strike the dust of the yard below him, each one raising a tiny puff where it left. And then the smell came up. There is no smell in the world quite like it, and Thomas had known it all his life, and it undid him a little every time. The smell of the first drops on the sun-dried earth. It rose off the yard and off the field and off the whole waiting valley at once, a deep brown-green scent of wet dust and rain-struck stone and something older underneath, the breath of the ground itself let out after holding it for 9 weeks. He drew it in through his nose as far as it would go. It filled his chest. It was the smell of the land forgiving the sky. It filled his chest. The first drops reached the porch roof over his head. The roof was old tin, and the drops came down onto it one and one and one, each with its own round note, spaced far enough apart at first that he could have counted the beats between them. Then the spaces closed. The single notes ran together into a soft, steady patter, and the patter thickened, and inside a minute the whole roof above him was ringing gently with it, a sound that came from everywhere at once and settled over the porch like a roof laid over the roof. The dog sighed and stretched her old legs out straight and did not lift her head. The dog sighed and stretched her old legs a spring stud, with each patter thickening into the spaces closed. The dog sighed and stretched. Beyond the edge of the porch, the world went to water. It came down now in earnest, straight and heavy and without wind, 1,000 grey threads let down out of the cloud and stitching the sky to the ground. The yard that had been dust was a sheet of leaping crowns where the drops struck and bounced. The lamplight caught the nearest of the falling threads and turned them to brief lines of gold before they passed out of its reach and were grey again and gone. The rosemary by the door bowed under it and gave up a great wave of its clean, resinous smell. Thomas sat in his circle of yellow at the edge of all that falling water and was dry. Thomas sat in his circle of yellow at the edge of all that falling water and was dry. The lamplight caught the nearest of the falling threads and turned them to brief lines of gold before they passed out of its reach and were grey again and gone. The rosemary by the door bowed He put out his hand past the edge of the roof into it. The water was cool against his palm, cooler than anything had been in weeks, and it ran off the heel of his hand and off the ends of his fingers in a thread of its own. He held it there a while. Then he brought it back and pressed the wet palm to the back of his neck, and the coolness went down his spine like a word spoken quietly in a lit room. He had not known how much of the heat he had been carrying in his own body until this cold weight of it lifted. His shoulders came down. He had been holding them somewhere up near his ears for the better part of 2 months and had not once noticed. He held it there. He sat with the cool of it against the back of his neck and let the evening do the rest. For 9 weeks his body had braced against the heat without his knowing. The shoulders up, the jaw set, the whole of him leaning away from a sun that would not relent. Now the bracing had nowhere to go. The heat that had held him so was beaten down into the ground, and his body, finding nothing left to lean against, simply came to rest. He felt it happen by degrees, like a held breath leaving a man once the thing he feared has passed him by. Now the bracing had nowhere to go. The rain read to him as one long sentence with no end to it, and he did not need to follow the meaning, only to hear it go. It filled the porch and the yard and the fields below and left no room in the evening for anything that was not itself. There was nothing to see to out here, nothing to carry, nothing to mend, nothing that could be hurried or held back by any effort of his. The work of the season had passed out of his hands and into the skies, and the sky was seeing to it, and all that was left for him was to sit inside the sound and be glad. There was nothing to see to out here, nothing to mend, nothing to mend, nothing discovery, nothing to preaches his morning. Down in the fields the sound had changed again. It was not one sound now, but many, layered over each other, each surface of the valley answering the water in its own voice. It was tin roof rang. The dust of the yard hissed. The dust of the yard hissed. The 2 apple trees rattled, and then, as they wetted and softened, began instead to drip and murmur. Far off, where the field met the trees along the creek, there was a broader, deeper note, the whole wood taking the water into its canopy and letting it down leaf by leaf toward the ground. Thomas closed his eyes and let the layers of it move over him. Far off, where the field met the trees along the creek, there was a broader, deeper note, the whole wood taking the water into its canopy and letting it down leaf by leaf toward the ground. The creek would not run tonight. He knew that. The ground was so dry that it would drink this first fall of water whole, straight down into itself, like a man kept from water takes the first cup without tasting it. It would take a night of this and maybe a day more before the earth was full enough to let the water gather and move and find the creek bed and begin, somewhere up in the high folds, its first trickle back toward the sea. But it would come. But he could smell the wet stone of the creek already, carried up to him on the cool moving air, the smell of rocks that had been baking all summer and were wet and streaming now. The smell would have been restricted to a small breeze that bruised the concrete. The temperature of the whole evening had dropped. The heat that had pressed up from the ground all day was gone, beaten down into the earth by the falling water, and in its place there moved a coolness that smelled of everything green. Thomas pulled the old coat from the back of the chair and drew it over his knees, not because he was cold, but because the weight of it felt right. The lamp burned steady beside him. The moth had given up its circling and settled on the brass to wait out the weather. Beyond the porch, the water came down and down and down, and there was nowhere in all the wide valley that it was not falling. Beyond the water suffered him through this winter. He thought of all the dry places taking it in. The cracked beds of the vegetable rows. The hard-packed lane where the cart went. The roots of the willows down along the creek, reaching and finding at last what they had reached for. The little garden by the door that he had kept alive by the cupful, getting now in 10 minutes more water than he had carried to it in a month. The land drank and asked for more, and the sky, which had withheld so many weeks, gave and gave without any sign of stopping. It was a good feeling to sit inside, this giving and taking, this old thirst being answered all around him in the dark. The little garden by the door that he had kept alive by the cupful, getting now in 10 minutes more water than he had carried to it in a month. This giving of his hand had come to rest on the top rail of the porch, and under his palm the wood was smooth. Not smooth from any sanding, smooth from hands, his own, 10,000 evenings of his own, and before his own the hands of his father, and before those the hands of the man who had raised this porch and nailed this rail across it and never lived to see it silver with weather. 3 generations of palms had passed over this one length of pine until it shone. 3 generations of palms had passed over this one length of pine until it shone. Thomas rubbed his thumb along the grain of it now, slowly, and the wood held the day's heat still, and holding it steadied him in a place he could not have pointed to. 3 generations of palms had passed over this one length of pine until it shone, not smooth from any sanding, smooth from hands, his own, 10,000 evenings of his own, and before those the hand. He had been a small boy the first time he stood on this porch and watched a drought break. He could not have been more than 6. It had been a summer like this one. The fields gone to straw, the grown-ups talking in low voices at the ends of the days. And then one evening his father had come and lifted him out of bed and carried him downstairs in his nightshirt and set him on the boards to watch. He remembered the boards cool under his bare feet. He remembered the smell coming up off the yard, this same smell, the one that had just now filled his chest again after 60 years. Some things the body keeps whole. Some things the body keeps whole. He remembered the small Niebly. The small Niebly was great Belich refused. His father had stood at the rail with both hands on it, not saying much, the way of men who worked the land and spoke to it more than about it. The boy had watched the water come up the valley just as the man was watching it now. After a good while, his father had said one thing, quietly, more to the weather than to the child at his knee. "There now," he had said. "There now." That was all. 2 small words let out into the falling dark, and the boy had felt in them everything the man could not have said in an hour of talking, the relief and the tiredness and the old deep gladness of the giving sky. The boy had watched the water as it felt for the sake of the person. He had no mistakes about the future. The entombed Malleolus removed his hand from them. He remembered his father's hands especially. Big hands, cracked across the knuckles, a thumbnail gone black from a hammer and grown out grey. Those hands had shown him the sky over the years that followed, pointing out the high, thin clouds that meant nothing and the flat-based ones that meant water, teaching him to read the West the way another father might teach a son to read a page. Those hands had shown him the entire country, from here to the South Carrictwing. By the time he was grown, he could stand in a dry field and feel a change coming a full day off, a knowing that lived below his thoughts. in the skin and the breath and the fine hairs on his arms. It was his father in him doing that reading. It would always be his father in him. Okay, now, the years had gone over the porch since then like more weather. His father had grown old in the chair Thomas sat in now, and then had grown too old to come out to it, and then one quiet winter had not been there to come out at all. The farm had come down to Thomas as it had to his father, not with papers and words so much as with a gradual handing over of tasks, the older man doing less each season and the younger doing more, until one day the whole weight of the place simply rested on the son, and both of them understood it had. There had been no moment to mark. There rarely was, with the things that mattered most. They arrived without announcing themselves and were only known long after. They arrived without announcing themselves and were only known long after. Now he was the old man in the chair. He felt the shape of that thought settle over him without weight, without sadness, the plain, true fact of it. The boy in the nightshirt and the father at the rail and the old man under the coat were all here on this same porch, all watching the same water come up the same valley. And the porch held them all without any trouble at all, because a porch does not know the difference between one evening and another. To the porch it was simply raining again after a dry time. It had happened before. It would happen after. It boards and the rail and the old tin roof had no memory to be troubled by, and Thomas, resting his hand on the smooth wood, borrowed a little of that peace for himself. The Borsha thought. The rain went on falling while he sat inside the memory. And when he came back out of it, the sound of the water had not changed, and the lamp had not burned down by much, and the dog had not stirred. Only a few minutes had passed. Only a few minutes had passed. That was the mercy of a night like this. There was room in it. A man could go right back to being 6 years old and come right forward again and find his cup of tea still hot, the weather still falling, the evening in no hurry to be over. He let the memory of his father go the same gentle manner he had let it come, with thanks and without holding on. He reached down beside the chair and found the mug he had brought out earlier and forgotten. The tea in it had gone off the boil to the drinking heat he liked best in any case, and he drank it in easy mouthfuls and watched the water fall past the lamp. The mug had a chip out of the rim, a clean bite of china gone from one side, and he turned it as he always turned it so the chip sat away from his lip. He had a whole shelf of good cups indoors and drank from this broken one every evening and could not have told anyone why. The dog's flank rose and fell at the top of the steps. The moth slept on the brass. The valley drank. The valley drank. After a time, he rose from the chair and crossed to the rail to hear the water butt fill at the corner of the porch. It stood under the low end of the roof where the water off that side ran down and dropped into it through a length of tin pipe his father had fixed there years ago. For 9 weeks it had held nothing but a green skin at the bottom and the husks of a few leaves. Now it was talking. He leaned over and looked in, and the pipe was running steady into the belly of it, and the sound came back up at him changed, fuller by the minute as the water climbed toward the brim. For 9 weeks it had held nothing but a green skin at the bottom. There is a note a filling barrel makes, and every child raised near one knows it. It begins hollow and open, a round tone off the empty floor of the thing, and as the water rises, the note rises with it, climbing by steps toward the hour it will overflow. Thomas had listened to this barrel fill every wet season of his life. He could tell the level by the pitch without looking. Half, he thought, hearing it. More than half. By morning it would be brimming and running over into the bed of mint below, and the mint would be glad of it. Half, he thought, he were thinking. By morning it would be brimming and running over into the bed of mint below, and the mint would be glad of it. He could tell the... Out across the yard, the barn stood black against the last grey in the west, and he thought of the animals dry inside it. The old horse would be dozing on 3 legs in his stall, one ear turned to the drum of the water on the barn roof, unbothered, having heard it every year of his life. The hens had gone up early to their perch, a row of soft grumbling shapes tucked head to tail along the rail, and they would sit there through the whole of it, close and dry, and come down in the morning to a yard full of puddles and worms. Everything under his roofs was accounted for. Everything had its place to wait in. Everything had its place to wait in. Say something random. A dog, a horse, a few hens, and himself. That was the whole of the household the rain had come home to. That was enough. It had been enough for a good many years, and it asked no more of him than to keep the roofs sound and the water carried and the doors shut against the weather. He counted them over in his mind, each one dry, each one accounted for. Then he stood a moment more with his hand on the rail before he went in. Then he stood. He stepped back through the doorway to find the old blanket that lived on the hook there. The kitchen behind him lay unlit and cool, holding the smells of the day, wood smoke and the heel of a loaf and the green of the herbs drying over the range. He did not light a lamp inside. He knew the room by feel and by foot, the corner of the table, the give of a loose board, the hook by the door with the blanket folded over it since the last cold snap. He took it down and carried it back out, and the sound of the rain met him again at the threshold like a room he was stepping into. The kitchen behind him lay unlit and cool, holding the smells of the day, wood smoke and the heel of a loaf still drying over the range. The yard had changed while he was inside. The scattered puddles of the first fall had found one another. They joined along the low line the cartwheels had worn, and made a thin, bright ribbon that caught the lamplight and carried it wavering across the ground toward the gate. Water was moving now where none had moved in weeks. It ran in the ruts and gathered at the foot of the steps and slid off toward the field, finding the paths it had always known, the paths the ground remembers even through the driest year. He watched the ribbon shine and thought that this was how the creek began, not all at once, but like this, everywhere, without fuss, 1,000 threads deciding at the same hour to run. The yard had changed while he was inside. The scattered puddles had found one another. They joined along the low line the cartwheels had worn, and made a thick down at the kitchen door. His garden was drinking its fill. He could not see it now, but he knew what the water was doing there, soaking down past the roots of the beans and the onions and the shaded lettuce, filling the cracked earth of the beds he had kept alive by the cupful. In a day or two, the beans would put out new leaves at their tips, pale and folded, and the whole patch would lift and thicken and go a green it had not been able to afford all summer. He had carried it this far on a jug and a promise. The rain would carry it the rest. The rain would carry it the rest. The rain would carry it the rest. He settled back into the chair and drew the blanket up over the coat already across his knees. 2 layers now against the cool that had come in behind the rain. The dog had not moved from the top of the steps, but she opened one eye as he sat, found him where she expected him to be, and closed it again. That was all she needed to know. He was here, she was here. The roof was over them both, and the weather could do as it pleased beyond the edge of the boards. He let his hands lie open in his lap and gave his attention back to the sound of it. The sound of it, the cooling note, the grooming note, the throttle catenized. He propelled this dimmy-trot in grint they could featherlot. For a while he did nothing but listen. The barrel filling at the corner. The ribbon of water crossing the yard. The barn roof drumming for the dry animals beneath it. The barrel roof drumming for the dry animals beneath it. the whole place taking the rain in through every surface it had, and giving back, each in its own voice, the sound of being answered at last. And under all of it, the great hush of the drinking ground, which made no sound at all, and was the thing he had waited for most. And was the thing he had waited for most. After a while, his mind began to move outward from the porch, loosely, without his steering it. It went first no further than the yard, where the puddles had begun to stand and catch the lamplight in broken pieces, then out across the low field, which he could not see now but could hear, a wide, soft roar of water meeting grass that stretched away into the dark, then down to the creek and its wet stones, and up the far slope to the single yellow point of the neighbor's window, burning steady through the falling grey. He thought of the man over there, older even than himself, sitting perhaps in his own doorway, his own old thirst answered on his own dry ground. Then out across the creek and its wet stones, it waded across the trees, hungry for another Chambers. He thought of the town yawning, but with unconventional. His thoughts went on past the neighbor's light, down the length of the valley toward the town. He pictured the rain falling on the town he had known all his life, on the church roof and the slates of the houses, on the market square, empty now, the cobbles shining under the lamps, water running along the gutters and down the drains and away, carrying the dust of a dry summer with it. Behind the dark windows, the people of the town would be lying in their beds hearing it, the ones who had wanted it as badly as he had, and some of them would smile in their beds to hear it and turn over and sink deeper into sleep for the sound. A whole town gentled by the same weather. Whole town gentled by the same weather. Wider than that his mind went, and slower, up past the town to the high fields, and past those to the open moor where no one farmed, where the water was falling now on heather and peat and grey stone, with no one there to be glad of it. It fell there just the same. It did not need a person to fall for. It filled the peat hollows and gathered in the moss and began, grain by grain, drop by drop, the patient work of becoming a stream. Everything up there was drinking too, the same as his fields, the whole roof of the country taking the weather in and holding it and passing it down toward the low places and the valleys and the sea. Everything up there was drinking too, the whole roof of the country taking the weather in and holding it and passing it down toward the low places and the valleys and the sea. It filled. The sea was where all of it was bound. In the end. In the end, he thought of that, drowsily, glad of the size of the thought and too tired to hold much of it. every drop striking his tin roof tonight had been lifted off that sea some days ago, carried inland on the moving sky, and let down here over his valley, and would find its way in weeks or years back down to where it started, through his creek and the town's river and the wide brown estuary, and out at last under the gulls. A great turning wheel of water, turning without hurry, older than the farm, older than the name of the farm. And he had a small place on it, on his porch, for this one turn of it. And he had a small place on it, on his porch, for this one turn of it. Then his mind came home again, drawn back in the same easy loop it had gone out on, from the sea to the estuary, from the estuary to the river, from the river to the town, and up the valley, and past the neighbor's light, and across his own dark fields, and over the creek, and up the near slope to the yard, and up the steps, over the broken third one, to the porch, to the chair, to the coat over his knees, and the mug still hot in his 2 hands, and the smooth rail under the reach of his arm. Here, he was here. The whole wheel of water was turning, and he was sitting still at one dry point of it, and that was enough, and more than enough. From the sea to the estuary, from the river to the town, and up the valley, and past the neighbor's light, and across his own dark fields, and over the creek, and up the near slope. The fall of water had begun to ease, not to stop, only to gentle the heavy straight threads of it thinning, the ringing on the tin softening toward a lower and steadier note. The first great thirst of the ground had been met, and now the weather settled into the patient part of itself, the part that would go on through the night and into the morning, soaking rather than pouring, the kind that does the deep good. Thomas felt the change in the sound before he understood it, and understanding it, he let himself sink another inch into the chair. There was no need to watch closely anymore. The best of it was here to stay. The best of it was here to stay. The lamp had burned lower while his mind was out over the sea. Its circle of yellow had drawn in a little, closer to the door, and the far edges of the porch had gone over to the blue-grey of the wet evening. The moth slept on the brass, out of the weather, tucked safe out of the weather. Down at the top of the steps, the dog had rolled onto her side, her legs stretched out toward the rain she would not go into, her breathing gone soft and even. Thomas watched her ribs rise and settle, and his own breath fell in beside hers without his asking it to, the two of them keeping the same easy time on the boards. The Thomas watched her ribs rise and settle, and his own breath fell in beside hers without his asking it to, the two of them keeping the same easy time on the boards. The smell of the evening had changed while he was not attending to it. The dust was gone from it now. For 9 weeks the air had carried that dry mineral note of baked ground and old seed, for he had breathed it so many weeks he had forgotten there was any other smell to breathe. Now the whole valley gave off the deep brown scent of wet earth, rich and cool and green at the edges, the smell of soil that was drinking and living again. It came up onto the porch on every stir of the air and filled him each time he drew breath. Not the sight of the water, the smell of the ground taking it. Now the whole valley gave off the deep brown scent of wet earth, rich and cool and green at the edges. He came up onto the porch on every stir of the air and felt the coat lay heavy over his knees. His hands were snug around the mug. The faint heat of the lamp reached him from the table at his side. 3 heats, each a little one, and together they made a low, good glow that held him in the chair. The tiredness that had come up through his legs earlier had spread now through the whole of him, into the back and the shoulders and the heavy hands, a heaviness that was not weariness so much as rest arriving ahead of sleep. The whole body flowed into with crappy, steady camouflage. The rain had come. The rain had come. There was nothing left that the day required of him, and his limbs seemed to know it, and one by one they let themselves grow heavy and still. The coat lay heavy over his knees. His hands were snug around the mug. The faint heat of the lamp reached him from the table at his side. 3 heats. The sound on the tin had settled to a low and even wash. It was the most restful sound he knew. It asked nothing of the ear. It rose and fell in low waves as the weather breathed over the roof, a little heavier for a moment, then softer, then steady again. And inside the wash of it there were smaller sounds a person could follow if he chose, or let go if he chose. The drip from the corner of the roof onto the water butt below. The trickle finding its channel across the yard. The far broad murmur of the wood taking the rain into its leaves. The Thomas chose to let them all go and keep only the wash, the one low sound that held all the others inside it. The woodchurn was inside the cart. Heg chose to follow the sound that he knew, and to just like Creasy he meant Crease, or to call him a Thabra-Crease onto the water butt that had uniformed Berthurhi one. He set the empty mug down on the boards beside the chair. His hand went back to the rail out of its old habit and rested there, on the smooth wood his father's hand had smoothed before him. The lamp burned low and steady. The moth had not stirred. Down at the steps the dog slept on, her paws twitching once at some easy dream and then going still. Out past the edge of the roof, the water came down through the dark over the drinking fields, over the creek that would run by morning, over the whole wide valley that had wanted it so and had it now at last. Thomas sat in the middle of all that falling and all that drinking and was still. The lamp burned low and steady. Down at the steps the dog slept on, her paws twitching once at some easy dream and then going still. The rain settled in for the night. It had stopped arriving and begun simply to be. There was no edge to it now, no front moving up the valley, no first drops and no last ones, only the steady fall, even and wide, over everything at once. Thomas let his eyes half close. The lamplight blurred to a soft smear of gold. The sound of the water filled his ears from every side. He was warm. He was heavy in the chair. He had nowhere else to be. The lamplight blurred to a soft smear of gold. He had nowhere else to be. He was warm. He was heavy in the chair. He had nowhere else to be. He was The dog breathed at the top of the steps. In and out, slow and even. He listened to her without meaning to. Her breath and the rain and the faint tick of the cooling lamp. 3 sounds, then only 2. Then he could not have said how many, or which was which, and it did not matter. They had all become the one sound of the evening, and the evening held him, and he let it. Then only the quiet wisdom of the steps. Can he read Stadter today or next time? His hand lay on the smooth rail. The wood held its heat under it still. He did not move it. There was a comfort in the touch of the old pine that went back further than he could follow, back through his own years to the boy in the nightshirt, and further to hands he had never held, all of them quiet now, all of them quiet now, all of them resting. The rail held his hand, and the porch held the rail, and the falling water held the whole dark valley, and nothing anywhere was asking to be anywhere else. All of them resting. The smell of wet earth came up over the boards again. Deep and cool and green. He drew it in. It was the smell he had waited 9 weeks for, and here it was, filling the porch, filling him. The ground was drinking in the dark. The roots were finding the water. By morning the creek would run. By morning the creek would run. I knew all of it without thinking any of it, the knowing gone soft now at the edges, sinking down below his thoughts to the quiet place where his father's weather reading lived. The ground was drinking in the dark. The roots were finding the water. By morning the creek would run. He knew all of it without thinking any of it, the knowing gone soft now at the edges. Say something random. The lamp flame leaned. A breath of the cool air had found it through the open door. It bent and thinned and stood back up and burned on. The circle of gold trembled once across the boards and then was steady again. Thomas watched it through his lashes without lifting his head. Such a small light, such a large dark falling all around it, and the little light held. Such a large dark falling all around it, and the little light held. Such a small light held. Say something random. His thoughts came slower now and further apart. A field, the smell of it, rain on tin, the dog's warm side, the empty mug he had already set down. They were not quite pictures anymore, these thoughts. They were closer to the feel of things. The heat of the lamp on his cheek, the weight of the coat on his knees, the smooth of the rail under his open hand. One by one they arrived and stayed a moment and went. They arrived. Out in the dark, the water kept falling. It fell on the yard and the field and the creek and the wood. It fell on the town and the far moor and the hills beyond. It fell on the just saved garden by the door, and on the tough old rosemary, and on the 2 apple trees letting down their leaves. It fell without hurry and without end, soaking the old thirst out of the ground, and the ground took it, all of it, and asked for more, and was given more, and was given more. The dog sighed and was quiet. The moth slept on the brass. The rail was warm under his hand. The rain went on, steady and low, over the drinking valley. Thomas sat in his circle of light at the edge of all that falling water. His breathing had gone slow. His hand had gone still. His hand had gone still. The lamp burned low and even beside him, and the sound of the rain came down soft on the old tin roof, over and over, and did not stop. The dog's side was quiet under the early gnawing ground. So the night held the porch. The porch held the chair. The chair held the old man, warm under his coat, his hand at rest on the smooth pine, the lamp a steady gold beside him, and the water falling and falling in the dark. On the roof the rain kept its low, even note. In the yard the puddles caught the last of the light and let it go. And somewhere down in the ground, too deep and too quiet to hear, the dry earth drank on through the night and was filled and was well.